Morning Live. We now take a look at your sports news with myself, Vusiwe Ngcobo. Now, for the first time since the 15th of March 2020, South African football fans were allowed into the stadium during the 2022 World Cup Qualifier at FNB Stadium between Bafana Bafana and Ethiopia. A total of 2,000 fans were permitted into the stadium following amendments to the Disaster Management Act regulations. Now, joining us on the line to discuss the implications of the amendments for football lovers and the possible return to stadiums in the PSL is SAFA Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Thulani Ngwenya. Dr. Ngwenya, good morning and thank you for joining us on Morning Live.
Good morning, Vusiwe. Good morning to all your viewers and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Talk us through the process, including your consultations with government that took place in order to eventually allow us to get to the point where those 2,000 fans were permitted into the stadium, and also just your areas of concern during that process.
Thank you again, Vusiwe. It was quite a lengthy process and it was quite a thorough process. Firstly, we had to engage the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, led by the Honorable Minister Nathi Mthethwa, to actually ask. In fact, it was the president, the SAFA president, that made a request to the Honorable Minister to have 2,000 spectators for the Bafana match. And then we met the Department of Health. We presented our protocols to the Department of Health. That was the delegation was led by Minister Phahla. And Minister Phahla welcomed our protocol and said this is like music to his ears because it was quite thorough. And then from there, we had then to go back to the minister because this is the minister's project, the Minister of Sport. It's his project. We then said, can we please pilot his project? Because his project is phasing in spectators so that we reach full capacity. We requested to pilot the project. And then unfortunately, at that time, you know, the disaster regulations were saying no spectators. So the minister had to work tirelessly in a short space of time to engage the Minister of Culture such that the regulations were amended. The regulations were subsequently amended on Monday, the day before the match. That tells you that the process was quite a hasty process. But having said that, we put our protocols in place and they were quite thorough. So what was supposed to be done was that we were pushing the drive by the government to make sure that everyone vaccinated such that we reach herd immunity. Now, this drive, again, is led by the minister, city to city, the Minister of Sport, city to city vaccination. So we are actually supporting government in the drive. That is why we said all the people that are coming into the stadium are supposed to be fully vaccinated. So we then went live on Monday at around 4 o'clock. And the tickets were sold out by 6. It took about 2 hours. That tells you how hungry people are for going back to the stadium. Now, the process entailed them applying online in the ticketing system in the link that we shared with them, and they had to put their details, names, and in vaccination code, ID number. And then once we reached the 1,700 mark, the system then shut off because we had reserved 300 tickets for the VIPs. And then when the people then received after applying, they would then receive a QR code either on their phones or on email, and then they would then bring the QR code together with the vaccination certificate and together with their ID, original ID. Then they were actually checked and verified upon arrival at the stadium. Before then, they moved to the marquee. In the marquee, then they were given a wristband, written their name and their seat number, and they were screened further for COVID symptoms together with temperature screening. And then from there, then they were then ushered through the turnstile to the seat where they're supposed to sit.
Okay, Dr. Ngwenya, you've mentioned a lot there around the process of getting into the stadium. We have heard some fans complaining about that process being rather too long. So if we were to move into a situation where, for example, larger numbers, for example, like in Europe, were allowed into the stadium, would we be able to actually deal with that demand?
Yeah, of course. Remember, this was a pilot project. We needed to check our systems that we have put in place as to whether they can work when we've got a larger group. Then this told us, this is one of the lessons that we have learned, that perhaps maybe the verification process needs to be done via the EVDS system, but that we need the Department of Health to come on board so that we have the system in place there at the stadium. So, but that is the process that we're going to be disengaging now between the Minister of Health and the Minister of Sport, so that we make sure that this process does not take that long. But we need it to be thorough so that we do not make mistakes this time around.
Okay, I want to also touch a bit on the 2,000 number. How was that number reached? Is that the number that was put forward by the minister himself?
No. The minister has a comprehensive document. The Minister of Health has a comprehensive document in terms of phasing in spectators such that we go to full capacity. This was a pilot project that was proposed by South African Football Association. It was basically because we had seen that the Disaster Management Act, or rather the regulations, were allowing 2,000 spectators, 2,000 people gathering outdoors. So we were using that, and we were using that as a pilot to the minister's phase in approach. Now, in terms of his approach and in terms of his proposal, it's quite comprehensive, and it has bigger numbers than the 2,000. The 2,000 was just to test the systems.
Okay, now, what lessons have you learned? I know you've mentioned the ticketing system, but what other lessons have you learned from allowing that limited number into the stadium? And what would need to happen at a PSL level for fans to be allowed back into PSL games?
And in terms of lessons, there's quite a lot of lessons to be learned. But from the top of my head, one of the other things that I can remember, our people, because they were hungry for football to go to the stadium, some of them had to go to the stadium without tickets. We had to turn back about plus 300 people that were there at the gate, because the security system was quite tight. And if you did not have 3 of these documents that I spoke about, and if any of these documents didn't have the same surname as per ID, unfortunately we're turning you back, because we needed to make sure that everyone that entered into the stadium was actually vaccinated. So that's the other thing. We need to educate our supporters more in terms of what is expected of them. Now, the other thing that needs to happen, perhaps maybe in terms of the ticketing, the system, our system was allowing you to buy a maximum of 4 tickets. So some other people then were buying for even their children, even though we had said that you can't buy for people that are not vaccinated. So that then posed a problem or a challenge. That is why some people, we didn't have the 2,000 actually at the stadium. We had less numbers because some people couldn't be allowed in, and some actually didn't come, which is unfair to the people that wanted to come. So those are the other lessons that we actually learned. But there's quite a lot of lessons. These are the lessons that I can actually think of from the top of my head.
Okay, we know that the PSL is earmarking the 30th of October to try and possibly bring fans back into the stadium. That's, of course, the MTN 8 final. In your discussions with the PSL, what are their concerns when it comes to opening up the stadium?
We are still due to have a meeting with the Professionals League. But what I can tell you is that the league and the federation are in synchrony, because the National Executive Committee of SAFA's resolution of actually starting to allow spectators back into the stadium was in connection with the Vice President of SAFA, who is the chairman of the league. So they all agreed that it is time to safely allow our spectators back, but it must be done in a cautious manner and in a safe manner. So right now, I can't really talk on behalf of the league, because we haven't had that engagement as yet.
Okay, and finally, as I wrap up with you, Dr. Ngwenya, we've seen the Australian Open coming out and making an announcement to say that tennis players who want to take part in the tournament next year will have to be vaccinated. What is SAFA's position in terms of the vaccination of players?
Well, in terms of the National Executive Committee's resolution, we are strongly advising everyone that is involved in South African football to vaccinate. But we cannot entirely say that you need to vaccinate or nothing. The resolution is saying that people must actually vaccinate. We are advising people to vaccinate, because when we are vaccinated and then when we reach herd immunity, then things can actually go back to normal. Yes. But we are saying, if you haven't vaccinated, rather do a test, and when you are involved in SAFA activities, do a test and provide vaccination, test certificate that is negative and not older than 48 hours.
Dr. Ngwenya, thank you so much for talking to us this morning. Have yourself a good day ahead.
Thank you very much. We'll see you.
That is, of course, Dr. Thulani Ngwenya, the Chief Medical Officer at SAFA, just talking to us about possibly opening up the stadiums in the PSL for, of course, football lovers across the country. Well, that's where we'll leave it for now. It is time for